Well, hello, children. It's Grandpa Joe again, and wanted to talk a little bit about my part in the second largest, I think, recall in United States history. In another video, I mentioned that I worked for a couple meat industries. I worked for Boar's Head for 6 years, and I worked for this company named Thornapple Valley, or actually the location was Dixie Foods. And I mentioned before that it changed hands a number of times. It started out as Wilson Foods, and then it was bought by Doscassil, and then it was bought by somebody else. I can't remember what that was. And then finally, the last I knew of it, it was owned by Thornapple Valley. Okay, so I started working for Dixie Foods when I was still single. So I was 25 years old, something like that, and maybe 24. Anyway, I moved to Arkansas from Florida to work there at this Dixie Foods. And as I said in another video, I was a third shift manager, and my responsibilities were this brine reconditioning system and the smokehouse guys, right? Well, while I was there, we did as part of the brine reconditioning system, we took all of these samples, right? And, that means, taking bacterial counts on different areas of the system. So there was the sump. So inside the smokehouse is a big tank, right, that stored the brine for the brine chiller, right? That's the last stage of the smokehouse where it freezes the hot dogs. And so you have this big tank full of salt water, basically, that's, chilled. So then you have the chiller system. So the brine is run through this chiller system where it's basically brought down to below freezing temperature and then pumped back, through the shower system back into the tank and within the smokehouse. And Dixie Foods had 2 smokehouses. Now, the way this smokehouse was laid out was that the entrance of the smokehouse was on what they call the raw side of the plant. So in any meat facility, you have the raw side and the finished goods side. So before it's cooked, you have a section, and then after it's cooked, right? So people aren't supposed to cross between those 2 areas. So if you work in the raw side or with the product before it's cooked, you do not go into the area where it's been finished, where it's finished cooking, because you don't want to carry bacteria from the raw product to the finished product, okay? And the way that the smokehouses are designed is that they start out in the raw section, then you have the cook process, and then it ends up in the finished side of the facility. That's the way it's supposed to work. Well, when I was working there, like I said, my guys did the third shift smokehouse. They ran the smokehouses for a couple hours, and then they were responsible for cleaning them. And as I said, because we were doing this brine reconditioning system, we took samples of the smokehouse and, in the area where the brine shower was, and we took samples in the chiller, and we took samples in the brine reconditioned area. We had 2 tanks there. One for the used brine and one for the reconditioned brine. And again, those 2 aren't supposed to meet. You never put unconditioned brine into the conditioned brine tank and vice versa, right? So at the end of the night, when you're done, you pump the brine into the used brine tank. It goes through the filter system, ends up in the reconditioned tank, and then from there, it's pumped back out in the system when they start. That's pumped back out to the smokehouse tank. So we collected samples during the whole process. Okay, so after the smokehouse was cleaned, we took a sample. After the chillers were cleaned, we took a sample. We took a sample of the reconditioned brine, a sample of the conditioned brine, or the unconditioned brine and the reconditioned brine, and at multiple steps during the process. So during the day, they would take samples, right, from each of these areas, from the chillers, from the brine tank, and from the reconditioned system, okay? So we could see where the levels of the bacteria would rise and fall during the day. That was the whole idea. So anyway, I'm going through all this, and you'll understand here in a second. So while I was working there, they had, of course, took these samples, and they noticed that, well, in one of the smokehouses during the day, the bacteria counts would get, pretty high, right? It's just like, well, this, there shouldn't be this much bacteria in this particular area. The other smokehouse was fine. So one smokehouse is fine. The other one was pretty high. Now, the one where the bacteria counts was high was an old smokehouse. So they took a smokehouse from some other plant and they brought it in there and reassembled it. The other one was brand new. Okay? So that's what their thinking was. Well, this one's old, so maybe there's something, that's causing that to happen, whatever, right? Well, my contention was that there's nothing wrong with the smokehouse. There's nothing wrong with the cleaning process, because they would complain, oh, you're not cleaning the smokehouse. Look at the brine counts, the bacteria counts. You're not cleaning these smokehouses. I said, yeah, look at the samples. When they took a sample of this area, the brine tank, it was perfectly fine. There was no bacteria. After we cleaned it, there wasn't any bacteria there. There wasn't any in the hot shower. There wasn't any in the brine tank. There wasn't any in the chillers. There wasn't any in the reconditioned brine. But then, as the day progressed, the bacteria counts would grow really fast. So it's as if bacteria was being introduced during the day. And that's exactly what I told them was happening. I said, listen, they were saying it was me, and then they just assumed, well, maybe it's a smokehouse. And I said, there are some concerns. I'm trying to talk to them. I said, first of all, you have a vent right over the brine reconditioning system. There's an exhaust fan there, but it's not hooked up. It doesn't pull any exhaust, and there's no cleaning nozzles in it, so there's no way for us to get, way up in there and clean it. So you need to seal that off. If you're not going to use it, it needs to be sealed off and put flush with the sealing of the reconditioning, the brine shower. I said, a bigger problem is you have the sump on the wrong side of the smokehouse. So the way these smokehouses were position, there was one right beside the other, and there was like a 8-foot space between them. All right, now the 8-foot space between them was the area that the smokehouse operators worked. Nobody else came in there, just the smokehouse people. Okay, and during the day they would have to add salt and check the salinity within the brine tank to make sure it was correct, right? And so they had this cutout on the side of the tank called a sump, right? Which was a little bit lower than the rest of the smokehouse. So that was the lowest point in the brine shower area, right? Was this sump. And it was, the smokehouse people could pour salt in there easily, and then it had a lid that you put on top of it, right? So nothing else would fall in it. Well, this sump was on the right side of both smokehouses. So for the new smokehouse, the brine sump was in the area where the smokehouse people worked. On the old one, it was out in the area that was exposed to the rest of the facility. So the sump for the old smokehouse was in the finished side of what's called the peeler room, where the hot dogs first come out of the smokehouse. And I told them, I said, listen, I said, that's the problem. The problem we have is that you have the sump is exposed, next to this door. Well, that door was where everybody on the raw side went down to eat and use the bathroom and whatever, and get to the dressing rooms. So everybody that worked on the raw side came up through that door and walked back to the raw area. Everybody. So they broke this cross-contamination rule because of the way that the plant was designed. They should have had a door that came out into the raw side. But they basically had both dressing rooms and bathrooms on the same side. The very front of the facility had dressing rooms for both raw and finished goods and bathrooms. Now there was a divider, like a area, like a foot bath and stuff, and they were told not to cross that. But when they came into work, they came through the door right next to where this sump was. It was supposed to be the finished side, but everybody from the raw side walked through that door and past that sump. So what I told him was, I said, listen, you got this sump right here that's exposed. I said, they hardly ever keep a lid on it. And I said, even if they did, it wouldn't matter. I said, when people walk by here, I promise you that these people are spitting in that they're rinsing their hands in that they're rinsing their boots in that. So over on the raw side, you have all this liquid emulsification from the hot dogs that gets all over everybody. It's all over everything, okay? This goopy, sloppy mess that they have to work with that gets on their hands, and they walk through, it's on their boots. So now these people are going to go downstairs into the dressing area, okay? They don't want to walk down there with their boots covered in this, crap, or their hands covered in this stuff. And so they're rinsing it off in this sump, and that's where you're getting the bacteria. Now, it's not that everybody's doing it, but all it takes is one person, okay? And now you've got a contaminated tank that's full of bacteria because it's been exposed from the raw side. And this is something I kept telling them, and they just ignored me. They never did anything about it. I told them, you need to move this sump to the other side. They said, well, that's going to cost a lot of money to do that. We don't want to do that. And I was like, well, then live with the bacteria. Well, you just need to clean it better. I said, look at the data. I said, I'm the one who collects the data and puts it in a computer. I know what the data says, and there's no bacteria here on startup. And I said, but it grows through the day. That means that bacteria is being introduced into the tank during the day. And I said, now they finally did seal up the exhaust vent. So that's the only place that it could be coming from. And it was a very obvious place. Of course, this is where the bacteria was getting in. There was no other place. This was it. So anyway, but it wasn't really super high. Okay, it wasn't, something where the USDA would basically shut them down. But it was a cause for concern because you would get listeria in there. Now if you have listeria in there, now you've contaminated hot dogs with the pathogen. But, regular bacteria wasn't an issue. And they really only concerned about it when they found listeria in there. So as long as there wasn't listeria, they kind of just, let that slide. So, like I said, I ended up leaving there, Big Dixie Foods because they were basically overworking me and not paying me. So I left and moved back to Florida. Well, then later on, after I got married and now I've got a kid, actually two kids, now I need some money. And so Dixie Foods called me up to come back to work for them, but they wanted me to work in the QA department. All right, quality assurance. So I'm supposed to be, assistant manager to the area in which is responsible for making sure that the product is of good quality and that we're meeting all the USDA requirements and the company's, whatever that is, requirements for quality, right? So I worked with the QA people. I had to in my job as sanitation manager and as cleaning the smokehouse. I worked with them all the time. They were the ones that we gave the samples over to in order to have them sent to the lab. So I worked with QA every day and had a good relationship with the QA technicians. Now, the manager, she was kind of bitchy and, smarmy, and, I didn't really like her. But the lab technicians, for the most part, were okay. And one of them, named Irma, she was top notch, okay? She was awesome. So anyway, I'm now hired back to work in QA. Well, I told them, I said, listen, I worked with QA, but I never worked for QA. So, I don't really know, how they collect their samples and what their procedures are and all that, and what the SOPs are, the standard operating procedure is for QA. I don't know what the requirements are or any of that. And they're like, oh, no, Joe, don't worry about that. I said, we'll train you on all of that. We know that you're a good hard worker and that you're a perfectionist. And, you really saved our butts when you were sanitation manager and really brought us to the point where we can, ramp up our production because now we can start on time, because, you got everything up to USDA requirements. So we want you back and we think you'll be a good addition. I'm like, okay. So I go back to work for them, but it is not the same facility at all. When I left, that facility was lucky to do 1 million pounds a week. All right. And that was like 6 days, of production in 2 smokehouses. And they were lucky to get out 1 million. Well, when I went back, now they're owned by a different company, and they're doing 2 million pounds a week production. I was like, whoa, man, that's crazy. So when I get back to there, I'm introduced to the operations manager. And the plant manager, like I said, it had switched hands several times, but the plant manager was the same manager that was there when the plant first started. Okay, this guy named Jerry, and he was there for about a year, and he left. But now he's back as plant manager for this new company, and they had this new operations manager was a complete and total asshole. I have never heard any person talk to their employees in the manner that this man did. He was not only using terrible foul language and calling out people and insulting people, but he was doing it at the top of his lungs. Screaming and throwing stuff, just absolutely, in the modern era, he would have been fired day one, okay? Because he was just the biggest jerk you can imagine. And the way he talked to people was unprofessional and just terrible, right? But he was getting, 2 million pounds a week, and so the company was happy with him, right? Well, they had this issue where they the brine reconditioning system was taking too long, all right, to process all the brine. So what they wanted to do was to, if they needed to be able to move the brine from one tank to the other so that they could, basically have two tanks to hold the brine. Okay? So what they wanted to do was to put in this pipe from one tank to the other and have a valve in there that they could turn on or off and allow the brine to flow into both tanks, basically. So if you remember back what I said, you're never supposed to cross the reconditioned and the unconditioned brine. You're never supposed to put reconditioned brine in the unconditioned tank. Okay? That was part of the system, the way it was set up. You don't want to contaminate a clean tank. So they were talking about this among themselves. And Jesse, who's the USDA person that was on staff, they were talking about how they wanted to do this. And Jesse tells them, no, I don't think that's going to work. And they're telling him, oh, yeah, Jesse, don't worry. It's going to be a fine. It's not going to be an issue. Blah, 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 blah. And he says, well, I tell you what. He says, the guy who is responsible for getting USDA approval for this system is working here now. He's in QA. So go get Joe Terhune and ask him to come down here and explain to him what you're wanting to do. And if he says it's going to work, then I'm okay with it. But if he says it's not going to work, then you can't do it. Okay? So they come get me and they take me down there. And this is the plant operations manager. And he's saying, yeah, I said, it's real simple. We just want to put things from here to here. And I said, well, you can't do that. And he says, well, we're going to put a valve in here. When that valve shut off, there isn't going to be any brine flowing through there. And I said, and even if that was the case, okay, I said, the procedure is, this tank is to remain clean. So you don't want to contaminate it. And I said, even if you clean the tank after it's, after you take the brine out, even if you clean it, it's still going to be an issue. You're going to have a hard time cleaning this tank and making sure you get all the residue and everything off of it. It's going to be, 10 times harder to get this tank back to where it was, bacteria free. It's going to be 10 times harder to do that once you contaminate it with dirty brine. I said the salt eats into the metal and creates, makes it porous, corrodes the metal, makes it porous, and the bacteria will hide in there. And so even if you clean it and do a sample, the sample may be fine because it's a surface level swab. You can't clean the bacteria that's now in the pores that have been created by the corrosive chlorine in the salt. And I said, now besides that, there is no such thing as a valve that is going to be able to prevent any backflow in every circumstance. Where are you going to find a valve that does that? Okay, it's just not there. So I'm saying no. There is no way that putting this system, doing the change you want to make, will meet the requirements. So of course, so now he's all mad at me. The plant operations manager is like really pissed. Okay, because I told him no. Well, so, I hadn't been working there but a couple days, and they come to me and say, yeah, Joe said, listen, we want you to sign some documents here as part of your job as QA. we need to sign these export documents. And I'm like, well, what are these documents for? Oh, well, it's just, we're going to export these overseas, to Russia and Korea, and it's just paperwork that needs to be signed, So it needs to be signed by somebody in QA. So that's going to be one of your jobs is sign these papers. And I'm like, I don't feel comfortable signing these papers. I've only been here 2 days. I don't know what the implications and what responsibility is going to be assigned to me based, by signing these papers. In other words, I don't trust the QA manager. She's, this is really shady. Why aren't you signing them? Why are you getting the new guy to sign these papers? And by the way, this is my only job so far, is signing these documents. I'm going into the lab. I'm trying to, asking to be trained. They're not teaching me anything. I'm just sitting there all day long doing nothing. They're not even talking to me. The techs are avoiding me at every chance they get. They don't want me to walk with them. I'm trying to learn from them, but they say, "Oh no, just stay in the lab." Yeah, Kitty says, Kitty's the manager. It says just for you just need to stay in the QA lab. Just just stay in there. And then when they come back to do their stuff, they don't want me in there. So it's like, what the hell is going on? I was told I was going to be trained on this stuff. I'm supposed to be these people's supervisor, and I don't even know what the heck they're doing. So how can I make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do when I don't know what it is they're supposed to do? And nobody's training me. So I'm realizing that there's some real shady stuff happening, right? And I'm scared because I just made this move. I haven't been there a week, and already there's these, bad feeling. So I corner Irma, right? The only QA person that I trust. And I tell her, I said, listen, Irma, there's some stuff going on around here, and something's being hidden from me, and I feel like I'm being manipulated, and I need to know what's going on. And she says, well, Joe, I can't talk to you about that, And I said, well, why not? And she said, well, Kitty says, we can't talk to you about anything. And I'm like, well, now for sure, you got to tell me. If she's telling you not to talk to me, okay, or not to tell me anything, I said, now I need to know. I said, Irma, listen, I said, I brought my family. I have a family now. I got a wife and kids that I'm responsible for. And I said, I've moved them up here to this area. And I said, and all they're wanting me to do is sign export documents? That tells me that there's something wrong that they're trying to hide, that they want me to take the fall for. And I said, I need to know what it is. And so Irma says, Joe, I can't tell you. I says, listen, Irma, I said, whatever you tell me is going to remain between you and me. I said, you don't know me very well, but what you know of me, do I appear to be an honest person? Have I ever betrayed you in any way? Have I ever said, told you a lie or anything like that to you, or thrown you under the bus in any way ever before? And he's like, no, you've always been really good to me. I said, I need this favor. I swear on my life that I will, whatever you tell me, I will keep it to myself, as far as I won't let anybody know where I got the information from. I'll just tell them I figured it out on my own. And so she told me, well, we have listeria in all our product. And they realized that we've been doing our own samples that we're not sharing with the USDA. And we are swapping samples. We're only giving samples to the USDA that we've already checked and, that we did on early runs and at the beginning of the day, and we hold those over and make it appear as if we're, giving them samples throughout the day, but we're really only giving them samples from the first run. because we know we've taken our own things and we know we have listeria and it's pretty high counts. And he says, so to keep from getting in trouble, they're shipping all this stuff overseas where it won't be sampled again. So when they offloaded off the boat over there in Korea and Russia, they're going to be distributing that without checking it themselves. They don't have the same system that we do. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm in the middle of a major international fraud. This is a catastrophe. So I'm like, well, thank you, Irma, for telling me. Thank you so much. I said, you've saved my life. Okay. And so I immediately took the job at Boar's Head, because Boar's Head had a job opening for a technician. And so I went over there, interviewed with them, and as soon as I had the go-ahead that they were going to hire me, I put in my resignation over at Dixie Foods. And like I said in another video, Jerry's like, well, I can't believe, you're going to leave us, Joe. Or, why are you going to... We paid for you to come up here, and I thought we've been really good to you, and you haven't been here 2 weeks, and you're going to walk out on us like this. I just can't really believe. Didn't realize you were that kind of guy, because I told him I just found another job, right? And I can't believe that, and that's why I said, can't believe it, huh? I said, well, Jerry, do you want to know the truth? You don't want to know why I'm really leaving? And he goes, yeah. I said, I think I deserve to know. I said, well, Jerry, I'm not going to be your patsy. I know what's going on. I know you got listeria, and I know that you're exporting all this stuff because it has listeria in it, and you don't want to be caught with it, so you're shipping it over to some other country. So let those people over there die of food poisoning. Okay? This is what kind of company you're working for now? That you're just fine with producing 2 million pounds a week and shipping it over to some other country? Hey, let them take the risk of dying. Let those Korean kids or old people die. Let those Russian old people or young and children die. I said, I'm not going to be your patsy. All you hired me for was to sign those USDA documents so Kitty would be off the hook. So she wouldn't be indicted. She can just point the finger at me. Oh, well, Joe was responsible. That's his signature. He's responsible for all this. So you could throw it all off on me. Oh, well, we got this guy, and turns out he was incompetent, didn't know what he was doing, and, he screwed everything up. It's all his fault. Indict him. Send him to jail. It's all his fault. I said, I'm not taking the fall for you guys. I'm out of here. So I left, and then I was over at Boar's Head for maybe a month. Okay? Oh, and by the way, I should tell you, Jesse, the USDA inspector, he cornered me one day, and he's like, why are you here, Joe? And I was like, well, I needed the money. I needed a better job. And he says, they're hiring over at Boar's Head. And he says, you really should go over there and see if you could get a job there. I think that would be a really wise decision. So in other words, Jesse already knew what they were doing. The USDA guy already knew. Okay? So he didn't say exactly what was going on, but it was pretty obvious from the way he was talking to me that something was, off. And that's what, kind of got, an additional reason for me to corner the QA lady and ask her what the hell's going on. So I'm over there at Boar's Head. I've been there for about a month. And I get this call from the receptionist. And she's got this kind of panicked tone in her voice. And she goes, Joe, she's kind of whispering, Joe, there's some federal marshals up here. And they say they want to talk to you. And it's like, I knew immediately what was going on, right? And I said, okay. I said, well, I'll be right up there. So I go up there and meet them. They introduced themselves and said, is there someplace we can talk? And I said, sure, we can come back to my office and talk there. So we go back to the office, And he said, "Do you know why we're here?" And I said, "Does it have anything to do with Dixie Foods shipping listeria-filled hot dogs to Russia and Korea?" And he goes, "As a matter of fact, yes, it does." And I said, "So we want to, get from you how much you know and what was going on." So I gave him the whole spiel. What they tried to do to me, what I, knew about the listeria issue that they had, and what was likely the cause of it too. Because, like I said, I'd worked their sanitation, so I told him what the reason why they had listeria. That dang raw side. So they've ramped it up twice as much product, which means twice as much movement going up and down them stairs past that sump. So, and the shady stuff they're trying to do with the reconditioned brine too, I told them they couldn't do that, but that doesn't mean that they didn't do it, right? Or hadn't been doing it before. So, told them the whole spiel. About 2 weeks later, there's a big article. Largest recall in U.S. history. Thornapple Valley had to recall 20 million pounds of product was tied up in the ports. So a good majority of the product that they had, shipped out there, was basically tied up in these ports. Basically, the USDA wasn't allowed them to take it off the boats. So when Jesse found out, he contacted them and tied up, the actual export. So, there may have been some product that made it out to the public there in Korea and Russia, but thanks to Jesse, 20 million pounds of it was held up, and that became the biggest recall in United States history. And all the upper management at Dixie Foods facility was indicted, okay, in a conspiracy, where, I don't know if they would say that it was a conspiracy of fraud. They really couldn't get him for killing people, right? But I think they came down on him pretty hard. Now, the QA manager, the one who got me involved in all this, she turned state's evidence. In other words, she ratted on everybody because she had all the records, right? So they wanted her because she had all the records. So she said she would cooperate, and I don't know if what they did to her. But some of the other ones, I think the plant manager, the operations manager for sure went to jail. I don't know how long, but that's probably the most harrowing experience of my entire life. Nearly went to federal prison because these assholes at Dixie Foods, and in particular, that chick Kitty Dodd, that bitch, purposefully wanted me to come back so that she could shirk all the responsibility off on me and basically have me go to prison for her, okay, so that she could keep her job and keep on doing what she was doing. So be careful out there. If you feel something's wrong at your job is not more important than the lives of, somebody. And if you're, feel something's off, then something likely is, okay? To put that sensation, those senses in you for a reason. And it's time to look for another job. Get out of there. Don't take the risk.